Okay, we're live. Welcome to the weekly Facebook live stream on a very special day. I'm Arnie Buss, and I'm so happy to have as my special guest Ron Triplett, who's a licensed marriage and family therapist, who's also an instructor at the a local college of communication, and an inveterate surfer. And and a very good friend, somebody who has spent years studying with Selwa Saeed, my mentor, and just is masterful at the skills. And welcome, Ron. Great to have you here.
Thank you so much. It's so good to see you again.
Great to see you. It's this COVID is just real. The last time we were together was in Selwa's living room. In fact,
right. 2.5 years ago, maybe.
Yeah. Selwa would have these gatherings in her living room where we would all work on practicing the skills. And Ron, you were a regular attendee of those. I tried to go to as many as I could. And well, I'd like to start, Ron. Tell me about how you first encountered Selwa and the skills.
I met Selwa when she was a guest lecturer in a class that I was taking when I was getting a master's in clinical psychology. And one of our local therapists who ran that program was working with and knew Selwa at the time. Her name was Madge Holmes. Mm-hmm. And I remember I was a little late to class, and so I was kind of embarrassed when I came in, and Selwa was sitting at the front of the room, and I'd never seen her before, obviously, and I wasn't aware she was coming. And so I took my seat, and there were maybe 10 of us in the class, and within minutes, less than 5 minutes, I just recognized that she was somebody that I was going to pursue as a mentor. And so I started taking her seminars, that year, 93 or 94, I forget. And then just, kept going and going. And it just seemed like it was such a language almost, just a different way of thinking about communicating, about speaking. And I'm so grateful, and I know you are too, Arnie, because you were there the whole time, as I remember. And it was like we could absorb through her at her knee, just this different way of thinking about talking to people.
Yeah, she was, what we were just sharing is how when we would be practicing tracking, tracking is the mainstay listening skill that Selwa would teach, that somebody would throw out a statement, and then we would all try to find the right tracking statement. And it was and then finally Selwa would come in with just the right one, and we would just go, where did that come from? How did you do that?
Yeah, she was masterful. Yeah.
So now you have a clinical practice of therapy, and I know that most therapists have modalities that they work with and approaches to helping people, and I based on what I recall you sharing, that the skills do play a role in this. Could you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. I remember going back to graduate school, I remember being exposed to wonderful theoretical perspectives, kind of the great traditional perspectives in psychotherapy, the original psychoanalytic perspective, cognitive theory, behavioral theory. And in my particular program, we studied quite a bit of an individual named Murray Bowen, who devised something called family systems theory. And so that was kind of my first love. But what was interesting is that what they never talked about in school was, how do you speak to a person in therapy? And it wasn't until I met Selwa that I learned how to listen in a way that was interactive. And you're not just sitting there being quiet, right? You're formulating statements back to a person while you're listening to them. And I didn't know how to do that and they didn't teach that in school or any really effective method. And so Selwa's skills are the tool through which all the theory gets expressed.
Mm.
But I'm not sure if that's quite accurate, but it's the framework for speaking in psychotherapy. And then what's in those conversations, sometimes some of the responses can be founded in some of those classic theories, but the tool is definitely 80% of the time is tracking.
Yeah. So, I mean, does it help establish that rapport, that sense of safety of the client, where they're, because therapy can kind of be scary. and
People experience, I think what can happen in therapy is that people feel analyzed. They almost feel like they're being sort of sliced open in the internet, and that's not very comfortable, and it doesn't feel very safe. And so, of course, what the tracking skill does is it immediately creates a rapport where people feel they don't feel judged, they feel understood. And so essentially, the way that it's always seemed to me is that when they start speaking and they start getting tracked, it's as if they feel safe to lay out on the table between us all of the things that are inside of them that are troubling them, that they're confused by, that they're fearing, or that they're sad about, or whatever. And in that process, their life becomes more clear. And so many of the problems, they find their own solutions. It's interesting. I say this often to my students that, supposedly or ostensibly, people come to therapy because they're trying to get a solution. And of course, I sometimes I kind of laugh to myself or my students and say, on the bad days when people ask for advice, I might start giving it. And that's one of being a bad therapist, but when I stick with the skill and I keep tracking, even when people, you remember this, Arnie, when people would say, what would you do? And of course the response is, so you don't have any ideas about what steps to take now. And of course, almost invariably, people will sort of look up and think for a second, and then they'll tell me what they're going to do. And 90+% of the time, it's what I would have said. And except the beauty is it's coming out of them, not out of me. And so it's their strength. So it's just, it's such an important skill for a psychotherapist to have. I don't know how I could even really conduct my practice without the tracking skill.
Oh, that's amazing. Yeah. And that's such an important distinction, even when the solution is the same, whether it comes from within someone or somebody else telling them, is such a big difference.
It seems to me that we're such an independent species. We really like to guide our own ship.
Yeah.
And I don't know. This isn't the prettiest part of my ego, but I don't like people telling me what to do.
Yeah.
I really want to make my own decisions. And I find that most people seem to be like that too.
Yeah.
And so advice giving, finding a solution, it's such a typical thing. It's not, I was going to say it's so typical with men, which I think is true, but I don't think that it's just men who want to give advice. When a person comes to us with a problem and they start to talk about what's going on, so often, so many of us see an opportunity to suggest something, and which of course doesn't really feel good to the other person. It's almost as if we're saying, listen, you're probably not smart enough to think for yourself, so let me tell you what you ought to do. And I don't know. It just, if there's something very technical that I need help with, I want advice.
Yeah.
In regards to like life's issues and relationships and so forth, I probably figure it out on my own if I can just be listened to.
Well, it's the difference between, sort of being a fixer or a facilitator,
Right.
So it sounds like that your role as a therapist is more to facilitate somebody finding their solutions, where I mean, if they could find their own solutions, they wouldn't be in, seeking your help.
Yeah.
And and so the best help that you can give them is to help them find their solutions.
Correct. Yeah, exactly. So in that way, it's we're almost more like a midwife or a doula or something. You know what I mean? We're helping them do what they need to do. But I often, when sessions start, I always take a deep breath and I sit down and I just kind of, where would you like to start? And because they're in the lead, they're the ones that are deciding where this is going to go.
Yeah, that's I'm a big fan of therapy myself. I mean, I've had I've dealt with my own therapy with various therapists of various helpfulness. Let's just put it this way. Some have been, and some have been not. Some it seemed that they come with their agenda, and that never kind of landed so well and wasn't so helpful. The ones that were helpful were the ones who were doing something along the lines of what you were talking about. I mean, I never had a therapist who applied the skills like you did, but there are good ones who apply the same approach. In other words, they're not trying to kind of get in like a car mechanic and kind of replace the right parts or something. Although that would be nice. You kind of go in, you say, okay, doc, fix me, and you go off and okay, end of story.
Yeah, that's interesting. That is what doctors do, right? Sometimes we call that the medical model.
Yeah.
It's interesting. Some therapists will talk about being directive, anyway.
Well, and all of this, what's interesting is in a way, this is kind of coming full circle from some of the origins of Selwa's work, go back to the psychologist Carl Rogers.
Yes.
Who had this kind of non-directive, I think he called it client-centered therapy, where instead of kind of the therapist directing things, it was all directed from the clients. And then two of his students, Tom Gordon, who developed parent effectiveness training, which was one of Selwa's first studies, and then Marshall Rosenberg, who developed nonviolent communication, both of whom Selwa studied with and kind of evolved her skills to another place. So it's comforting to kind of see that Rogers' sort of idea is being carried forward like this.
Yeah. Of course, Marshall's too, right? And it's interesting. I didn't know that that Marshall Rosenberg studied also with Carl Rogers. Mm. That's interesting. I remember Selwa talking about studying with him, and one of the differences, because I know so many people have been trained in nonviolent communication, Marshall's approach, but one of the big differences was that Selwa saw the idea of making requests. She saw that differently. Do you remember that, Arnie?
Oh yeah.
She talked about not doing that and allowing people to gift you a behavior change.
Yeah.
And I have always loved that. I use an example in class. I'll drop something on the ground in front of a student, and I'll look at them, and they look at me, and then of course they reach it most of the time, unless sometimes they can be silly, but people will pick it up and they hand it back to me. I say, "Oh, thank you so much." And then I'll walk over to somebody else and drop it again. And then I'll say, "Would you pick that up for me?" Yeah. And then ask, which was more fun? Is it more fun when you get to see that I need something and gift it to me? Or is it more fun when you are responding to my request? Would you do that for me? Even if it's done kindly, it's still, in a very gentle way, you're still doing what I told you to do. And again, we like to be self-directed.
Yeah.
So I always agreed with her. I thought that was such a wonderful idea.
Yeah. That was what she called a mamnoon, if you remember.
Oh, that's right. Remember? I'd forgotten that word, mamnoon. Yes.
Yeah. And which means that, well, it's like if it's a way of responding to a request as if you're the one who's gifting me by having the, the pleasure of doing something for you.
Yes.
But the interesting tie-in with Marshall Rosenberg is that when she was at one of his classes, she talked about that, and he picked up on it. So Marshall Rosenberg has this whole thing about mamnoon now, where again it was all what he learned from Selwa.
Yeah, I thought there was an influence that went back that other way too.
Yeah,
You know, and just an idea that I've actually never linked this together before. But there's a professor up at Berkeley. His name's Dacher Keltner, and Dacher has studied happiness over the last 35 years of his career, and looked at what is it that truly makes people happy. And one of the things that he identified was giving to other people. And that just so beautifully fits hand in glove with her idea of mamnoon.
Yeah. It's kind of interesting too, because well, one way I think of it is the difference between children and gifts and adults and gifts. So, it's like when we're children, we love to receive gifts. It's, like Christmas morning, we can't wait to kind of tear open see what we got. Did we get that Xbox? Did we, and as adults though, we get more pleasure out of giving the gift.
Yeah.
So it's like, when there's somebody that you really care about and you find the perfect gift for them, and it's like you can't wait for them to open it and sort of see their delight in it. And that's what mamnoon is. And what's beautiful about the way Selwa taught it is that attitude we can bring into everything, all of our relationships.
Yeah.
And it's a beautiful one.
What a gift. Yeah.
So I know you also teach communication classes at our local college here, and I've heard you talk about how you kind of slipped the skills into the curriculum.
I started teaching that class in 2000, and so this coming fall will be the 22nd year that that I've been teaching it, and even through the pandemic. Although we've been doing it online, but there's a textbook, and in the textbook, of course, there are solutions for communication that that are kind of related to, or not related to, but similar to the skills. So, for example, they're still teaching things like, so what I hear you saying is, and I think they have something called the 5-part message, which is really a clunky version of her impact message, which is, I think, a refined version, right, of the old I messages. And so those are all in the textbook. And I'll say to the students, listen, there are some approaches to communication that are in the textbook. You're welcome to read those. I'm going to be teaching you something that I just think is finer. And so then they learn the skills. And up until she had, she passed away, maybe even a few years before, because, she hadn't been teaching right at the end. Yeah. But I used to always put her name and number on the board, and some handful of students would go on and study with her. And, you were telling me, Arnie, before we went live, that you are also carrying on those workshops. And I'm so glad to know that, because I want to put your name and number up on the board now and be able to, as a resource, so the students have a place to continue their study. Because in my class, there's a whole curriculum that's required, for the class to be transferable and so forth. And so we probably, out of the 16 nights that we meet, there's probably 3 or 4 nights where we're just, maybe 3 nights that we're just focused on skills. And then we'll do a little bit each night, but we have a lot of other curriculum to get through. So it's really only an introduction. So I'm going to be happy to lean on you as a reference.
Oh, that I really appreciate that. Yeah. And because part of what, part of my motivation in this really is to carry Selwa's work forward, because, the people who studied with her, and then a few, are really the only ones that know about this. And this is just so important. It's too important to kind of, let pass with her, because, she was amazing. And what she came up with was just so, so I can't describe it more. And to me, like in some of the people I've been doing relationship coaching, where the skills play a huge role. And I mean, I got a voice message from someone she was so excited because she had finally given a coworker an impact statement about something that had literally been bothering her for years. And she said, not only did it kind of get the outcome that she wanted, but it's like it actually drew her and this other person closer together. So it's just kind of I just melted when I heard that.
Yeah. That's wonderful to get feedback like that, because it's so effective. It's really, you were searching for words for a second to describe just, how important this work is. And I always thought that it's so clear. Her channel, of this kind of information, it was just so clear and right. So I'm glad that you're doing that, and I feel the same way. Just want as best I can to honor what she did and pass it on.
Yeah. And what I really, again, I remember all the times when, somebody would throw out a really challenging statement, and we'd be trying to track it, and just we'd all be kind of coming close and okay, a little, and then she would just finally say, okay, here it is. And, I miss that so much. I mean, it's like there have been times when I'm going, okay, how do I track that? And actually, this is something. Well, maybe if I could put you on the spot a little bit. One of the things that somebody I've been working with has helped me develop. She was asking us, says, well, when do you track someone? I go, and then if you remember, Selwa had said, well, when this is expressed or whatever. And then this woman I was working with was sort of pressing me a little bit harder. And so I was able to basically come up with 5 different specific instances where one can track. And they were things like if somebody expresses pain, if somebody is complaining, if somebody is criticizing, or if somebody is confronting, or if somebody is joyful. That was kind of the interesting one, but one of the things that I'm still struggling with a little bit is how to track somebody who's really in sorrow, for lack of better. So just even something like somebody says, oh, Ron, my cat just died, and I was like, okay, I mean, how would you kind of, like, my first instinct would be, oh, I'm so sorry. Well, of course, that's not tracking. That's about me. So I would imagine that in working with some of your clients, a lot of times they are expressing a lot of pain. So, I mean, could you share a little bit about how to track that pain?
Sure. So I think you sort of, right. We use the tracking questions, right, to guide us. What are they saying? Why are they saying it?
Mm-hmm.
What do they feel? What do they want? And I think that that guide can be such a help in coming up with a response like that. So somebody says something like that, oh, my cat just died, but of course they're saying more, right, than just those words.
Right.
You're watching them. Mm-hmm. And you're watching their face, you're watching their body, you're listening to the tone of their voice, and you're getting information from that. And so what you might hear is, the cat just died and they're sad, that maybe that's what they're saying, or
Mhm.
the cat just died and they're heartbroken,
Mm.
or their cat just died and they were shocked,
Mm.
or their cat just died and they're sad, but they're kind of relieved too.
Mm.
You know, it was sick and now they don't have to worry about it anymore. It's out of its pain, you know.
Mm.
And so it would really depend on what it is. So you might say something like, oh, you're glad that your cat's it's not suffering anymore, or you didn't expect that it caught you off guard, or you're heartbroken. Your cat was everything to you.
Mm.
And so it would depend right on the other pieces of information that we're coming across. So whatever it is that we're seeing in that person, whatever it is that they're saying about that event, would it be an important piece to track back?
Oh, absolutely. Well, yeah. Yeah. And that is so, I mean, yeah, I really appreciate that, because that shows how, I mean, tracking is about the totality of what is being expressed, not just the words.
That's right.
And so it really, as you're saying, it's so important to be attuned to all of these nonverbal cues that we often don't, you know, when we focus on the words, it's like we're missing the message.
That's right. And thankfully, most of us are pretty good at observing nonverbals. You know, we do it and we don't even know we're doing it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now we may not be consciously doing that, but you know, that's what we have the term autism to describe people who have trouble with that, right?
Yeah.
But most of us don't have autism, and most of us are pretty good at reading cues. Not that we necessarily always pay attention to that. But if we're absorbing the person in front of us, we'll get it.
Yeah.
We'll get the message. And then that's what we track back, is the whole, like you said, the whole picture.
Wonderful. Beautiful. Well, it's you know, it has been a delight catching up with you, and I really appreciate all of the work that you're doing with and especially in carrying the skills forward. And I hope we can it can be less than another couple of years.
I hope so too, Arnie.
Now that, you know.
Yeah, what a wonderful invitation. I really appreciate doing this and seeing you and talking about these skills. I'm so glad that you're out there doing this.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate that. And, you know, and for those of you, if you're interested in contacting me I'm offering a complimentary session where we can kind of explore what kind of goals you're looking for your relationship. And if you want sort of a professional therapist, I can recommend nobody more highly than Ron Triplett. And again, there'll be information about that somewhere in the this, and you'll be able to click on that, get more information about Ron, get more information about myself. And until then, just happy tracking. Or as I like to say, keep on tracking.
That's great.